For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sanel Dlamini. Hayden Davis, a partner in the corporate practice of Webber Wentzel, joined me to discuss his book titled Investing in South Africa. Welcome, Hayden.
Thank you.
Tell us, who should be reading this book titled Investing in South Africa, and who is your target audience, and what do you think they will gain from reading it?
Well, the main target audience really is potential overseas investors. So we normally send the books to, for example, overseas South African consulates, embassies. We give it to people who hopefully are going to invest in South Africa, and it's intended to be a very detailed, an overview, but also very detailed in respect of the content about what to expect when investing in South Africa. So it's really an outward-looking market, hopefully with people investing in. It's also of use, I think, to people inside South Africa who may want to know a little bit more about things like taxation in South Africa, competition law, intellectual property. It gives a really good overview of the investment landscape in South Africa.
And tell us, how did you go about putting the book together? Because I noticed there is a multimedia section of the book.
Yeah, well, I tell you what we do. It's really a joint effort of a lot of people in the firm. I'm merely the editor. So what we do is we choose a few people in each department. So, for example, competition law, intellectual property, dispute resolution, and we invite them to write their piece, their chapter. We then pull it all together so there's a consistency. We do the editing. So it's really the total work of probably about as many as 70, 80 different professionals within the firm. It's also evolved over many years. I mean, this is our best publication to date, but you know, the origin of this dates back probably about 10, 15 years, and we keep revising it. So it's really grown into the premier publication on investing in South Africa.
And what could be the implications of maybe foreign investors who might come to our country without being legally informed about the South African laws?
Yeah, I think most investors nowadays are always wary when they're entering into a new jurisdiction because culturally it may be different, economically it may be different. Frankly, if they're not going to get proper advice, it's going to cost them a lot of time and wasted effort and money ultimately. So this is really just an opportunity for them to get the lie of the land and then hone in on more detailed advice if they require it.
And what are the most South African government departments that the foreign investors would have to deal with?
Yeah, I think the departments they're most likely to encounter would be the Department of Trade and Industry, also the South African Reserve Bank from an exchange control perspective. Those are, you know, typically departments they would have dealings with, as well as the well, they call it now the CIPC, but the Companies Office, you know, in terms of forming a company, registering it. That would also be interaction. And I think finally, last but not least, South African Revenue Services, because they would typically need to register for income tax, the company they created would, value-added tax. Those are the main players that we usually see.
And how would you assess the current investment climate in our country?
Yeah, well, as you see everywhere, there is a bit of doom and gloom at the moment. But, you know, what I always think is that it's sentiment-driven, isn't it? And if you think how ridiculous it is, it's like a pendulum that swung too far. You know, in 2010, we were the best place on earth, and only 5 years later, people are saying, you know, too many negative things. I think we were never the best, but we're certainly not the worst. You've got to get balance. And I think for firms, overseas firms that have got a forward-looking, clear strategy about investing in emerging markets, that narrative hasn't changed. You know, and if you've really got some common sense and a clear strategy, now's a good time to be investing, particularly given, you know, favourable exchange rates. There's some great assets to be buying in this country, some great investments that could be made. So if you're not following the herd of sheep and you've got a bit of intelligence, I would say to those people, actually now's the better time, rather when everyone else was pouring in perhaps a few years ago.
And do foreign investors face specific challenges as compared to our local investors who might be interested in business deals?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, which on incoming investment is extensive, is no, not really. I think their main challenge is getting to understand the local economic, political and social environment, like you do when you go to any different country you're not familiar with. But in terms of, fair treatment to those investors, there seems to me there's always been a level playing field in that regard.
And what are the key sectors that are currently maybe?
Currently, well, yeah, notwithstanding the depressed oil price, I mean, we're still seeing a lot of activity and potential investment on the oil and gas front. And I'd say that not only in a South African context, but also look at the bigger Southern African picture, Mozambique. And so, again, if you've got a little bit of vision and you can look 10, 20, 30 years ahead, there's some unbelievable opportunities. And they're not going to go away. That gas is there and that oil is there. So I think that's a sector that still carries a lot of interest.
And what has been the impact of recent weakening of our South African rand?
Yeah, I think that's all part and parcel of this just poor sentiment, not towards South Africa, but towards emerging markets, of which we're one. But ultimately, I'm a big believer that economics rules, because sooner or later, our rand is devalued. What can only mean there'll be more exports. It'll start to balance out. Probably fewer imports, and great opportunities for inward investment. I mean, can you imagine, investing at 16 rand to the dollar? You get a lot of bang for your buck if you're an American investor. So I think we mustn't be too distracted by sentiment, both worldwide, that's outside our control, and self-created here, unfortunately, which is just probably a little bit naive in some quarters.
And can you please provide comment on on what investors can expect from South Africa's newly promulgated Protection of Investment Act, because now it seeks to help both local and foreign investors should they need South African courts to help them?
Yeah, I mean, my view on that is that I don't think it's going to take matters much further. For the most part, that bill states, it's now an act, it was a bill, became an act, it states the obvious. A nice lot of woolly, cosy kind of feelings expressed. But, foreign investors were always entitled, if they wanted to litigate in the South African courts. They receive fair treatment there. So saying what's always been the case doesn't make it any more true. You must remember the context of this act was it wasn't even required until, of course, they decided to discontinue and terminate certain of the bilateral investment treaties. So typically with a lot of the European countries. So because of the uproar that was caused and the negative sentiment caused by the termination or the intended termination in respect of some of them of those bilateral investment treaties, the government felt it needed to come up with something else. That's why we got this. Frankly, if you read it carefully, it's a short act, a few pages. It really doesn't take you that much further. It says the government will enter into mediation if it has a dispute with a foreign investor at the request of the foreign investor. Okay, but it was always open to the government and foreign investor to mediate anyway. It says the government can, if it wants, agree to international arbitration, which was the real problem with the bilateral investment treaties, because the government was getting hauled outside of South Africa to these independent bodies, which it wasn't always necessarily keen on. So frankly, I think it's much ado about nothing. I don't think it creates any more positive investment climate. It came about because of the negative perception created by, in my view, the unnecessary termination of bilateral investment treaties, and it needs to be seen in that context. My prediction going forward is we'll hear very little about it in future.
Thank you very much, Hayden, for your time, and good luck on your book.
Thanks so much. It was great to be here.
Thanks. That was Hayden Davis, a partner from Webber Wentzel, speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about their book titled Investing in South Africa.